Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for still being here. So we're really excited about our next presentation here too. We've got Dr. Christine Agaibi Habashi. So we're happy to have her here with us. She received her master's and her doctorate training in counseling psychology in Ohio. I don't want to read her full bio, but it's really impressive how often and how much Christine is devoted to speaking in our community, raising awareness about this subject, and being able to really be a presence and a resource for people around, both in an academic sense. She chairs and leads a variety of different initiatives, task forces, and such, and has been active as a writer, as a speaker, as an educator. So we're really fortunate and blessed to have her with us today, especially on the topic that doesn't always get, like Dr. Haney was telling us, there are some topics that we talk about all the time, maybe a little too much. Some topics that we don't talk about quite enough, and trauma and resilience are one of those topics. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Christine with us tonight.
Thank you for having me, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about a very important topic in terms of trauma and resilience. Resilience in particular is very near and dear to my heart. It's something I've been talking about and researching for 20 years or so. So I hope to kind of give you some of that knowledge that we've had over the last 20 years or so. And so today we've talked a lot about different kinds of psychological symptoms and disorders, as well as relationship between stressors and how those disorders come about, and also about religion and spirituality and how those relate to disorders. So today I'm going to be covering kind of two sides of the same coin, one side being PTSD and trauma, and the other side being resilience, and to show that we can be resilient even when things are really, really difficult, but we can manage kind of disorders with resilience. And resilience can be broad. It's not just related to PTSD, and hopefully we can see some of that today. So as we know, many times throughout our life, there we go. So many times in our lives we have felt kind of like this. Like we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders, we have a lot of adversity, and we can maybe have even felt that this week or this month or this year, or even for a significant period of time in our life. And some of those things are caused by stressors in our life. So think about the things that are causing stress in your life. They could be things like being overworked, having too much on your plate, not having enough time for yourself. It could be stresses due to relationships, stresses due to financial reasons, or even the things that we hear in the news or traffic or small things from day to day. And this unfortunately distorts the messages in our minds. So on the outside, sometimes we may appear really happy and cheerful and okay, but on the inside, we're feeling really down and stressed. And it can distort messages in our mind that we are unimportant or that we're shameful, like we've heard today. But those things are actually not necessarily true. So if this is the case with average everyday stressors, how much more would be an issue if we were experiencing something really traumatic? So let's talk a little bit about what trauma is, PTSD. This used to be called shell shock or a battle fatigue syndrome, because people used to see this when people would be coming back from a war zone or when they've experienced war, whether as a combat veteran or even people living in war. It also develops after somebody has experienced or witnessed a terrifying event or experienced a terrifying event. Some of the harm could come from something that was seriously done to them or threatened to be done to them, and has long-lasting consequences, because the memories that arise over and over and over again from these things can create significant physical and mental health concerns. So it's not just in that moment when somebody was stressed, but it can go on beyond that as well. Some things that are considered traumatic are things like serious physical harm or that has occurred to somebody or has been threatened, like I said, situations of fear, situations where someone has felt helpless, if they've experienced horror of some sort, if they've experienced the threat to be harmed, if there's intimate partner violence, which I'll talk a little bit more about today, if there's been an assault of some sort, an unexpected death of a loved one, if there's been an accident, a war, natural disaster. Families of victims and also healthcare workers can experience something called vicarious trauma just by dealing with people that have experienced trauma. And also emergency personnel who are dealing with significant events and are sometimes on the front line. And so all of these things can create trauma in individuals' lives. And the issue is that if it lasts for longer than a month, It can create a lot of fear, it can create a lot of helplessness, it can feel feelings of dread or horror, feelings of shock or anger, nervousness, fear, guilt. Sleep can be affected, appetite can be affected, and so sometimes these things show up right away and they can last for a month or longer, and sometimes it can show up later on. These are all experiences of trauma, however. So usually the experiences of trauma, according to the DSM, involve a lot of reliving of the experiences. People will get flashbacks, people will get even hallucinations, they'll get nightmares that will happen along with these traumatic events, they'll get a lot of intrusive negative thoughts, and they can increase in frequency, especially during things like anniversaries of that event, during special events, and so those things can be relived for years and years as well. You'll also see that people will avoid where that situation happened. So if the situation happened in a certain location, they won't go to that location. They'll try to avoid it and not go to that place. And it can actually affect a lot of things. It can create anger, like I said a little bit ago. It can show in their emotions. It can show in their appetite. And they can be constantly on guard and hypervigilant that something else is going to happen. So they get really worried and scared and anxious about these things happening again. And so it can increase a lot of negative moods and thoughts that go along with these issues as well. And this percentages are small, but for people in mental health, it's quite frequent that you see a lot of people with trauma. But about 3.6% of Americans, or 5.5 million people, will experience some sort of PTSD throughout a year. And that equates to about 7.8 million Americans over a lifetime. And so that can be a significant amount of number, especially in pockets in different places throughout the world and throughout the country. And the interesting thing is that it can happen at any age. So I work in Philadelphia, and I see lots of kids sometimes that can come in with traumatic events. And so we see kids as well as adults that have these issues. An interesting statistic, though, is that women can kind of experience this as well because of intimate partner violence, which I'll talk a little bit more about in the next few slides. So psychologists and psychiatrists will diagnose this, and then they'll start treating the traumatic issue, and we'll talk about how to do that in a little bit as well. So some research shows that interpersonal violence is even more significant than things like natural disasters, or accidents. So it's important to look at that aspect as well, because the interpersonal relationships could be somebody that they're dealing with continually and every single day. So that violence could be over and over again. And if you experience a lot of trauma as a child, it affects how you perceive that trauma the next time you have a trauma as an adult. So it's not just something that occurs with just children, but can continue on for somebody's life throughout their life. And there's also biological reasons that can make someone susceptible, like what I was saying with other disorders. It can make you susceptible biologically, but that doesn't mean that we have to succumb to it, and that's what the resilience piece will be all about. So interpersonal violence, intimate partner violence, has to do with people that somebody is very close to, a spouse, a partner, where there's a lot of abuse issues. Could be physical abuse, emotional abuse, could be, it could be prolonged, it could be shortened, and then it could happen again and again. Could be even things like financial abuse. So we don't talk a lot about those issues either, but somebody could be withholding funds from somebody else. And so there's other kinds of intimate partner violence as well. So here are the statistics in that. Nearly 1 in 5 women report experiencing some sort of physical violence from an intimate partner, and that number drops a little bit. In men, it's 1 in 7. 1 in 5 women and 1 in 12 men have experienced sexual violence with a partner, and then 10% of women and 2% of men have been stalked. So it's not even something that's physical, but even feeling fear from being stalked can be related to this as well. So the consequences caused by this is that it affects society, obviously, as a whole. 41% of females that have intimate partner violence, and 14% of males say that they've had some sort of physical injury. They're more likely to engage in risky behaviors, and there's a cost to this in society, taking time off of work, healthcare issues, obviously, and dealing with criminal justice issues to kind of bring these people to justice, and of course, PTSD. So we want to create an environment in our churches that kind of, this is a little bit hard to see, but that creates more safety, more ability to, again, come and talk about these kinds of issues without feeling fear or retaliation or shame, and bringing them to have more meaningful experiences in their life so that they don't feel that they can't talk about these experiences with maybe the priest is in the front lines of this, and then dissipating that to the people in the community. So treating PTSD can be kind of complex because the problem is that there's a lot of avoidance, as we said, with PTSD. They avoid the place where those events happened. They avoid the thoughts and emotions that go along with it. So because of a lot of the avoidance, then there becomes an issue of how do we treat this? How do we treat the anxiety and the depression and all of the things that come along with PTSD? And how do we regulate people's emotions? So therapy is a very good coping strategy, and medications as well. But again, the problem is that they try to withdraw from the thoughts. When you do therapy like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, you bring up a lot of these thoughts again and again. And so the avoidance piece makes them want them to resist the treatments that are being given to them. They also want to resist the feelings, so they may go and self-medicate or do something else to avoid the feelings. And they avoid the sensations in their body as well that has to do with these things. So there's other ways to do this through therapy, and several ways of therapy have been shown to be beneficial. So exposure therapy is slowly exposing the individual to these uncomfortable feelings over and over and over again until they become comfortable with them and they sit with those feelings. But it's done in a controlled environment. It's not back in the place where the trauma occurred, and it's in the presence of a professional who knows how to do this. But it's slowly exposing that individual to those traumatic feelings. And then we also want to use cognitive behavioral therapy to change and reframe their thinking about that situation, that they're more in control now in the psychologist's office or the psychiatrist's office than they were when they were in that traumatic situation. Also, because this affects a family unit, you might want to involve other family members if they're not part of that trauma, because this healing one person is good, but if you send them right back to that same situation, then we're dealing with another issue there in that situation as well. So sometimes family therapy is warranted, sometimes that person needs to be removed from that situation, and sometimes people have found benefit in group therapy as well, because now they're in a room with other people who've experienced traumatic events, and they see that they're not alone, and they're getting support from other people that have experienced something similar. The important thing to remember is that, again, this is two sides of the same coin. So there's research that shows that not everybody that experiences something traumatic will experience PTSD. In fact, some people are resilient, and we'll talk a little bit about what those words mean in a minute. But it's a truism to say that not everybody that experiences a traumatic event will become a post-traumatic stress disorder case, but some people do become resilient. So we want to get people from the sense of carrying, again, the weight of the world on their shoulder to people that are thriving, even if everything around them doesn't seem beneficial. So just as this flower is kind of budding out of a very arid and dry and unnutrition environment, so people can also rise, and that's what the science of resilience is all about. So why is it important to look at these painful situations? There's a study that is very old at this point, but it's still a beneficial study, because psychiatrists had examined, in 1967, 5,000 patients and tried to make a connection between health disorders and life situations. So we've been talking a lot about the biopsychosocial spiritual model, and those things are very much connected. So they wanted to see what is the connection between health cases and life traumatic events. And they found that the more traumatic events the person had, like the death of a spouse, the death of a loved one, something wrong with their home, financial situations, the more stressors that they had in a given year, the more likely they were to have health conditions as well. So we want to maintain a less stressful environment for people, because it also affects not just their mental health, but their physical health as well. And yet at the same time, there's some researchers that say we will all experience a threat to our wellness at some point in our lives. If we live long enough, and even with small children sometimes, at some point everybody will experience something difficult that is either transient or chronic, something that is long-term. And so that we can be restored back to wellness, if we focus on this wellness wheel, if we focus on things like resilience, we focus on things like our spirituality, we focus on things that are meaningful, we can return to a place of wellness. So even though there's threats to our wellness, we can still become better over time. So this is the interesting piece as well, is that we always anticipate for the good times. We have wedding showers and baby showers, and we plan to buy a house, and we plan all these wonderful good things, but we don't really anticipate when the bad times are going to hit. And so we kind of are left without coping skills and coping measures, so that when the bad times hit, if we don't know how to adapt, it's kind of like a roadblock. We don't know what to do. And yet as Christians, we know that challenges are going to come. Christ said that the world is filled with tribulations, but I have overcome the world. And so we know that as Christians, we're going to have difficulties, we're going to have tribulations, we're going to have times of difficulty, and it's not going to just be smooth sailing simply because we're Christian. So the question becomes is, what do we do when there are these times of challenge? If you look at a tree and it's blowing in the wind, if it doesn't learn how to bend, that tree will break and it'll die. So we want to be like that tree that is bending, not a tree that is breaking. So a tree that is unbending is easily broken. But we can do two things in our life. We can let situations either break us, or we can learn to adapt and reshape our lives and become successful members of society. And in fact, the research does support this, that there are kind of 4 things that people can do when they experience a trauma. They can either succumb to that trauma and just give up, and their functioning is impaired. They can survive and just continue to function and go through the motions, but they're not really, excuse me, having a meaningful kind of situation. They can kind of recover and go back to a baseline of where they were before, but again, they're not thriving. Or we can thrive and prosper and go beyond where we were before, and that's really the meaning of resilience and kind of things like post-traumatic growth. So many factors come into how well people can do this. It is partly biology, but our biology isn't everything. Things like our personality, how well we're open to getting advice from other people, gathering resources from other people, getting support from our community, getting support from our church, our professionals, how well we process information and can kind of reframe the events that have happened to us. And research is showing also that resilience is kind of like a chain reaction. Once it starts, it just keeps going. So we want it to really start and kind of start a chain reaction in our life as well. So it's really important to start that chain reaction by thinking positively, and we'll talk about ways to do that throughout this presentation. And the good thing is that we have tools, as being Christians, we have an extra tool of faith and belief that things will get better, that things will change with time. But we can also use the powerfulness of our mind to change our thinking patterns about different kinds of things. So let's talk more specifically about what resilience is. So resilience is a very old concept, and yet it is a new term scientifically. If we look at stories from the Bible, we'll see oftentimes that people that have faced a lot of difficult situations and overcame them. So there's pictures up there of Job, of Naomi and Ruth, of Esther, of St. Paul, and of Joseph. There's also philosophical characters like Confucius, who said, our greatest glory is not in falling, but in getting up every time we fall. And there's a similar phrase in Proverbs that says, fall down 7 times and stand up 8. So there's concepts of hints of resilience throughout biblical history and throughout biblical characters. St. Paul also said we are crushed, but not in despair, not abandoned, and not destroyed. So we can see hints of that, again, in the Bible, but there's no word of resilience in the Bible. We've also heard it from poets and from philosophers, that which does not kill me makes me stronger. The poet Robert Frost, 3 words I can sum up, that everything I have learned is that life goes on. But from a scientific perspective, resilience has only been around since about 1975 or so in the scientific literature. And it was initially studied in children when they noticed that children that were growing up in chaotic environments, if they had even just one person in their life that was a stable figure, even a teacher or a mentor of some sort, or a coach, or in our case, the Sunday school teachers, those children, even if they had lived in chaotic environments, tended to do better. So they were really wondering, how are these kids coming back from difficult environments and difficult situations and being resilient and being good members of society? They also started to look at war veterans, and they looked at the Korean War veterans, the Vietnam veterans, and the Gulf War veterans, and saw that there are certain personality characteristics that helped people to overcome difficult situations, difficult memories of war, and if they were self-confident and assertive and calm during pressure, they tended to do better than other people. When they also looked at Holocaust survivors, people who have gone through probably some of the worst atrocities, they found people that were really religious and had a good connection to God, as Abuna was saying. Those people tended to do better, even though they were living in hunger and disease, and their freedoms were taken away. And they still connected to family and social support. Even in the barracks, they would connect to other people, and that helped them to be resilient. If they had a positive belief system that they would get out of the situation, they tended to do better. And if they created meaning out of that difficult situation, they tended to do better. Some people thought, no matter what the struggles are of the Holocaust, I'm still going to keep going. I'm going to be strong-willed. I'm going to be unwavering. I'm going to do what I have to do. I'm going to keep looking forward. I'm going to keep going. And so they kept going, and that helped them to be resilient. And so there's an interesting connection between not just the personality, but their environment as well. So if they had, again, social support, if they had people that they were connected to, they would do a lot better. And then after those negative situations were over, they wanted to help others. So they would go out and give talks and speeches about how they overcame this situation and how to be kind to other people. And so they kept that going for years and years later. So resilience is actually a term that people throw around all the time. You hear it in the media, you hear it everywhere you go, but it's actually quite complex from a psychological standpoint. It has a lot to do with that person, situation, interaction. But if you look at this, this is a model of what resilience looks like. And resilience actually occurs on a continuum. So on the left-hand side there is long-term negative adaptation, or low resilience. And that's when you have a lot of negative experiences and not a lot of coping skills. So the environment that you're in plays an effect on your psyche, plays an effect on your actions, and that creates a low resilience situation. That's, again, when there's extraordinary challenges and you don't have enough coping skills to overcome it. So if you want to look at like a disease model, it's too much of a viral load or a disease load, but not enough coping skills to help you overcome that virus. However, on the other side of the continuum is a person who can bounce back and can rebound after a difficult situation. They may have the same negative experiences, but they have ability to connect to other people, to things in their environment to help them to overcome those negative situations. So it can be understood in the context of trauma. That's why I say it's two sides of the same coin. But it can be accomplished by positively reframing that situation that you're involved in. It's very highly personalized. So if it works for one person, doesn't necessarily mean you can apply the exact same thing to another person. But it has a lot to do with that person and situation interaction. The stressor is also multidimensional. The same stressor can be applied to two different people, and two people can react completely differently from each other. And so the response is very unique for each individual person, but again, it's how well they can mobilize resources, they can reframe their thinking, they can deal with the situation that they have at hand. So again, it's quite complex. Some people simply say it is the ability to proceed successfully despite threatening situations, and other people use this long definition that is here. But basically, resilience is the ability to adapt, the ability to kind of be like this rubber band that stretches across the trauma that they're experiencing and is able to adapt to that situation. So this quote is really kind of expresses that she stood in the storm, and when the wind did not blow her way, she adjusted her sails. So sometimes the wind isn't blowing our way. Sometimes the situation is really difficult, but we can adjust who we are to the adversity. So take a few seconds here and think about some adversity that you are facing right now. Do you blame anybody for your problems? Do you think that God might have a purpose for you in this difficulty? Do you have insight into the hardship and what it has taught you about your own spirituality? What lessons have you learned from this hardship? And likewise, when you look at a challenge, do you see the situation as a challenge or as a situation of despair? Again, when somebody sees something as a challenge, that means I can overcome it. I just need the right tools, I need to talk to the right people, I need to think in a different way, and it's a challenge. If it's a situation of despair, like we said initially, you succumb and just give up. When you look at the future, when you're going through a difficult situation, are you hopeful or are you discouraged? Again, the people that are usually hopeful, that I can figure this out, I can again talk to some people and figure out how to deal with the situation, do better than the people that are feeling discouraged and hopeless. What kind of meaning did you develop out of that situation? Again, is there a purpose that God may be giving me or helping me to understand? And even if I can't come up to that conclusion, what else can I do with this problem? How can I problem solve? And how did you respond to that situation? Did you look at problem solving? Did you think of different solutions? Or did you, again, just give up? And what happened to your faith? Did it become stronger or weaker through that situation? So in the next few slides, let's talk about how to promote resilience in your life. And one of the key things is that we find things that we need to balance throughout our lives. And I'll talk about balance in the next few slides because a lot of times in our very busy, kind of structured, routine kind of life, we don't have a lot of time for things that get thrown out of nowhere. And so you can promote resilience by what areas in your life are you struggling to balance? What areas of your life are you most confident about and strongest in? Areas that you don't feel so confident in? And who is your support system? So is it people in your community, people in your church? Is it your priest? Is it your partner or spouse? And so how do you balance all those different areas? There are so many different areas that we need to balance, from emotional to spiritual to intellectual to financial to all of these different areas. And when one falls out of that balance, that's when we have a little bit of issues. So what areas in our life need work? What areas are most important to us or are we most focused on? And are the areas that we're focused on, are those the most important? Or are we neglecting one area to focus on another? Maybe we're focusing too much on work and not enough on children or family. And so how can you get more balance in these areas so that you feel more resilient when struggles, things happen? If you don't have a lot of balance in your life, you need to schedule a time to sit with yourself, to sit with your father of confession, to sit with your priest, to sit with God and evaluate what stressors you have in your life and prioritize them. We often try to do too many things at the same time, and when we do that, we lack priority in trying to find resilience through our difficulties. We try to, when we're so busy, we lose connection with other people, we lose connections with our community, and when we do that again, things start to fall apart and unravel. The American Psychological Association put a task force together a few years ago that helps us to look at how we can make resilience a priority in our life. First, by making connections to other people. The first thing that people do when they're going through a struggle is they try to isolate. They try to run away, they try to hide in their room, they try not to talk to anybody, and they get consumed with these ruminating thoughts of all the difficult and negative things that are happening in their life. So the first thing is to make connections and to talk to people that are around you in your community. Again, that's why support groups are so beneficial, and group therapy is so beneficial, because you're in a group. So we try to do that through our communities as well. We want to try to avoid seeing a crisis as insurmountable. If we see everything as a Mount Everest and we can't climb it, we won't take those initial steps. But if we say it's not insurmountable, it won't be. We have to take initial steps to try to overcome the problem. We also want to accept that change is part of living. Not everything is going to be the same always forever. Nothing stays the same forever. So we want to accept that change is part of life and not get so bogged down by the details of that, but to try to problem solve through the changes as they come. We want to make goals and make decisive action to work towards those goals. We want to look for opportunities of self-discovery. Again, what can I learn from this new situation? And nurture a positive self-image, keeping things in perspective, maintaining a helpful outlook, and always remembering to take care of your body, mind, spirit, and spirituality and everything as we talked about today. Some research has also shown that if we reflect back on our life, and this is why it's so important to have some quiet time, even if it's for an hour in the morning or an hour before bed at night, where you sit and reflect on your life, you will see that you've been resilient throughout your life at some point. And so maybe you can deconstruct the memories of the last time you had a difficult situation and pay attention to where you had areas of vulnerability and how you escaped from those areas of vulnerability. You also want to point out patterns of strength, because again, when we're going through a difficulty, we throw all of that strength out the window and we think only about the problem. But we all have strength, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But we have to point to patterns of strength that we had when we were going through a difficult time. And how did I use those patterns of strength to create a narrative of resilience for my own life? So the last time I had this problem, these are the things that I did, and this is how I got out of that problem, and how I problem solved out of it. And if you can't find any evidence, get corroborating evidence from other people. Talk to your spouse, talk to your priest, talk to your therapist, Talk to somebody who can help you say, yeah, you did go through that hard time and you were able to come out of it. And after you've done all that, then you're able to make a tailor-made resilience plan for your own life. You've found support, you've anticipated where the problems may be, and you've used the past, the present, and your hopefulness for the future to solve this problem that you're currently in. And so it doesn't, again, look insurmountable because you now have tools to overcome that problem. The other thing that happens when we're going through struggles or through trauma is that there is a self-esteem issue. So again, our self-esteem drops, our confidence stops, and we need to find a way to kind of build up back our self-esteem. We also want to face the problem head on. We don't want to be like this guy who sticks his head in the sand and thinks that problem is just going to go away if I just stick my head in the sand and I don't worry about it. Facing the problem head on and problem solving is the best way to deal with that situation. Again, having positive, healthy relationships is beneficial as well. You also want to reframe the situation and find some positive emotions, because there's some research that shows that if you have positive emotions, even during a difficult time, it opens up your mind, it helps you to have an ability to problem solve and to think about the problem. However, when you think negatively, your mind closes and you're not able to problem solve as well. So you want to reframe towards positive emotions during a difficult time. Even if you're going through a difficult situation, you want to create meaning out of it. How can I help others in this situation going through something similar? Or what can I do to create meaning out of that difficult situation? You want to focus on strengths and not just point out the weaknesses or the adversities. And you want to, again, accept that sometimes change is a part of life and not just ruminate about the problem over and over and over again. In order to create a more resilient person, research shows that those who express gratitude, even for a couple small things a day, tend to do better in the field of resilience in terms of resilience. It could be something really big that you experience that you're grateful for, or even everyday things that seem mundane, they're not actually mundane. You want to know what your strengths are again. We've mentioned this a couple times. I'll talk more about strengths in the next slide. And you also want to savor good experiences. There's some research that shows when you are experiencing something positive and you savor it, you don't rush through it, you really sit and kind of let it sit on your mind, then that creates like a bank account of positive experiences that you can withdraw from when you're having negative experiences. So savoring is really, really important in terms of positive psychology research and resilience research. Again, if you're able to kind of sit with the good thoughts, you can withdraw from those when you're having a difficult time. Again, examining your own story of resilience and being kind and supportive to others. So these are the 24 character strengths that have been found, and you can go on this website and take a small test that can help you to figure out what your strengths are. These are 24 character strengths that have been found in different degrees in every person, regardless of their culture, regardless of their religion, with their country of origin, race, socioeconomic status, it doesn't matter. We all have these 24 character strengths at some levels. And so it creates a unique kind of profile or constellation for you that tells you which ones are your highest strengths and which ones kind of are lower. You can use those strengths once you figure out what they are via this quiz to tell you who your real self are and how to build upon those things so that you can have a stronger resilience profile when you're facing difficulty. Interestingly enough, religion and spirituality is on there. And so if you're a very spiritual person, that is a great strength to use when you're going through a difficult time. How do you know when you need help? People are obviously on a spectrum during any given point of time. They can either go between healthy to severely unwell. We see people all areas of that spectrum. However, if you're struggling or unwell, you should probably get help sooner rather than later. But again, we see people all across the spectrum. And the other thing is that sometimes stress makes us feel that things have to happen immediately. They have to happen right now. Why isn't this happening? I'm a certain age and so has not happened, or this thing hasn't happened. But God reassures us that He has things under control and that it will happen in His own timeline. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be actively seeking and have goals and fix things in our lives as well. We should be active and proactive. If you need to talk to somebody, you can start by talking about your emotions. You can start by simple emotions like these 4 and move up to more complex emotions like these. The person that you talk to should be someone who is a professional or a priest. They should be warm and genuine, not someone who is judgmental or will bail out on you on the first chance things get a little bumpy. They should be somebody who's empathetic, somebody who's consistent, and somebody who's patient. We also want to stop our negative thinking, which kind of comes in automatically when we're going through a difficult situation. We ruminate over and over and over about all the negative things that can happen. But our thoughts are very powerful. And again, if we use positive emotions, there is research to support that you are able to kind of climb out of that situation by positive coping mechanisms and problem-solving skills. However, when we think negatively, our mind kind of shuts down and we're not able to do those things. Again, we want to practice gratitude, be thankful for even small or seemingly mundane things. Nothing is really mundane. We want to be supportive of other people. We want to apply our own story of resilience to whatever situation we're experiencing. We want to increase our positive emotions. And then we want to use the stress to our advantage. We want to change the message from things that are really negative to finding our courage and finding our way to persevere even when the situation seems to be rough. Find what it is that makes you really happy and passionate and pursue those things. And realize that there is a key to every problem, even if it's not right in front of you today. That doesn't mean that you won't have an answer to that problem by tomorrow if you talk to the right people and get some help. And also, sometimes we shame people for their emotions. So it's probably normal to have emotions if you're going through a major crisis, if you're going through a health crisis, or a financial crisis, or somebody in your family is sick, or if you have a child that is not cooperating. It's normal to feel overwhelmed and angry and sad and those things. But you don't want to be prolonged in those things without being able to function. And again, those are signs that things are not going the way that they should, and maybe you need to seek some outside professional help. And most importantly, it's important to take baby steps, because sometimes we feel that we want to just get to where we want to be by a certain time frame, by a certain age, by a certain comparisons with other people, and so it's important to take baby steps towards our goals. We want to have positive coping mechanisms, and those things involve things like praying, meditating, talking with our friends and family, accepting that, again, that there may be a problem, allowing ourselves to cry if we need to, solving problems with other people, dealing with our anger appropriately, taking a walk, exercising, doing some healthy things. If we were getting really angry, like Abuno was saying in his talk, count to 3 or 5 or 10 or step away, give yourself a timeout before you are able to react. And know when you're starting to feel overwhelmed and say the word no. It's okay to say no, so that you don't put on too much on your plate and then you feel overwhelmed and not resilient. From a spiritual resilient perspective, you want to have a goal. And sometimes in fast, we do this a lot now that we're in Lent. We have spiritual goals of what we want to accomplish through Lent, but throughout our lives, we should have goals. We want to focus on what's not working and either remove it or tone down that part of our lives. We want to not be complacent, but always be vigilant. We want to be balanced. We want to practice gratitude again, not give up, and let God help us. And after we've done those things, we can help other people as well. We can be empathetic towards other people. The Bible tells us in Thessalonians to encourage and build one another up. And again, in a church community, we should be able to build each other up, because this is a hospital for people that are sick in any kind of capacity of life. And so we can show people that we are patient with them as well. We are consistent. We should follow up. We should pray for others. We should be kind for others. And the important thing to remember is that when we're going through a situation, to examine our lives, what's working, what's not just to go through the motions, just to get through that situation, but to also remember that Jesus himself experienced some difficulties because he walked in the same shoes that we walk in. And so it's important to know that he did not be overcome, but he overcame by his resurrection. And so back to one of the Holocaust survivors that we talked about a little bit ago, this quote is very interesting, is that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, and that's the last of human freedoms, that we can choose our attitude in any situation and choose our attitude in any circumstance, to choose one's own way. So even if everything was taken away from us, we can still choose our attitude and how we're going to deal with that situation. And again, from a spiritual perspective, the Bible doesn't leave us empty without verses when we're going through difficult times, but this is just a handful of verses about how to persevere. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. These things I've spoken to you, that you have peace in the world, that you may have tribulation, but be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. So there's lots and lots and lots of verses. I'm not going to read them all. But verses for worry, verses for do not fear, verses for, I think do not fear is said 366 times in the Bible. So there's verses for things when we're going through difficult times as well. And again, to have a good dimension of resilience is to cover it from all aspects, from that biopsychosocial, spiritual model. We have to be physically well, we have to eat well and sleep right and sleep enough time and exercise. We also have to be mentally well, we have to be emotionally well, spiritually well, in order to become more resilient. And as I end, I want to focus on this interesting practice out of Japan, where they take broken pottery and they don't throw it away, they repair it with gold. So it becomes more valuable and more beautiful and more precious after it's been broken than it was before it was broken. So try to think about that in our lives as well. Also, think of ourselves as individually we are one drop, but when we're in a community like we are here today, then we're as powerful as an ocean. And so if you need extra help, these are different types of mental health professionals you can turn to. Psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, licensed counselors, they all work together, but they have different roles, so pay attention to that as well. And then here's a list of resources, and if you have any questions, my email is there at the bottom as well. Questions? Yes.
Do you ever do any work with like EMDR?
I haven't personally, but I have read about it and been to seminars about it. It is beneficial for PTSD.
Or maybe just explain that too.
So it has a lot to do with eye movements and changing thought patterns at the same time. It's called EMDR. It's a treatment that is used for post-traumatic stress disorder. So it has a lot to do with eye movements while changing thoughts, because again, you're bringing up the negative memories that occur with post-traumatic stress a lot. So the sessions are having to do a lot with eye movements. I haven't done it myself personally, but I have been to seminars where people have trained on it. And then you're changing the thought patterns, the negative thought patterns that go along with post-traumatic stress disorder. Good question. You raised your hands at the exact same time. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. That was a great talk.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It just had a wealth of information. I was just wondering, you keep talking about having servants being prepared to handle and to thank you. So we keep talking about having servants being prepared to handle difficult situations and just know where to refer and all that stuff with regards to mental illness. But do you think there's a place in the church to consider as part? Because I know we have things like servants preference in some churches. Do you think it's worth a while for the church to consider having people who like resilience training for the servants so that they know how to also build advocates? You know, how much more we can do if we think of more prevention than dealing with the crisis situation, and how much can we do if we actually talk about educating people about how to manage life's challenges prior to getting to a crisis phase? Just wondering your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think that's. I think it's really important to do that, to have prevention and to have these kind of first aid type toolkits to give to individuals on how to deal with traumatic type things. However, you don't want to get too deep, because if you get too deep, you need to kind of refer to professionals who do this on a daily basis. But just teaching resilience is really important. It can be taught to kids as, with play and the strength-based things that you can do with kids as well. So learning about what their specific strengths are and boosting those up Because again, everybody has those strengths, from young people all the way to, the elderly. It's just a matter of boosting up those strengths in people so that they're aware that they're there to use them when things get tough. So prevention is definitely good. However, if you're dealing with a severely traumatic situation, you also need to be able to refer out as well, and that's why the resources are up there, so that you don't get overwhelmed. But we do those things in servants prep. I know East Brunswick does it at least. And they have their servants prep, and I've given talks there on resilience as well. And I have another one in a couple weeks with another church. So I know that some churches are picking up on the importance of making kids resilient, because they are bombarded with a lot of things, just from the media, being on social media all the time. It doesn't get shut off. Like, when we were kids, we just shut off the TV or the newspaper, and that was it. Now it's in their hands constantly. So yes, we should definitely be aware of that and do it in servants prep. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, thank you again for a very needed talk.
Thank you.
I'm wondering about our kind of cultural negative thinking, because like, we can work on ourselves and have these resilience tools, but when people go home and there's negative kind of narratives going on all the time, and I hear that all the time, is that people are like, I'm trying, but all I can hear is the negative rhetoric that I grew up with. So how do we cope with that, one, and two, any suggestions of how to work with kind of other generations that may not be so open to hearing about change of behavior? Yeah, sensitive questions.
Yeah, that's a very important question, because nobody is by themselves in a vacuum. They come from a system. So it's difficult to break the older patterns, but I also have done talks in Arabic to older, the parents and things like that, to help break some of those stigmas and those difficult conversations. However, if you are building that one person, hopefully they realize that what is being said to them is outside of them, and they don't have to listen to all the negative messages at the same time, and that they can find their own strengths again. But if you can work with the system, the family system, the family unit, the different people in the home, if you could do visitations and go visit a family, then that can help. But if one person is really stuck in their ways and they're not willing to change, that doesn't mean that that child or that teenager can't change and can't think positively and kind of be where the cycle ends, kind of thing, the negative cycle. But of course it is difficult, because they go right back to that environment. But again, if they're focusing on things that are meaningful in their life, maybe their education, maybe things that they want to do with their own life, that becomes their purpose, that becomes their goals, and they don't have to focus on negative messages that are being thrown at them as much. It's unfortunate, but again, if we can deal with the whole system, that would be wonderful. Yeah.
One more round of